has this emerged as such an emotive issue for both the Koreans and the Japanese?
That too has taken time, and that has, in my opinion, everything to do with the post 1945 world to the present. In 1965, when Tokyo and Seoul normalized diplomatic relations, the island again emerged in numerous discussions over sovereign control. Japan had clearly lost control of neighboring Ulungdo, which in 1947 Japan had made very clear that it expected to get Ulungdo as well as Dokdo. It did not in the San Francisco Treaty. And so the island known as Takeshima in Japan emerges in the 65 document as something as disputed territory between the two, but one that has reams and reams, pages of documents over shared fishing rights and delimited lines over navigational rights, whose lighthouse markings mean what. So there's very clearly acknowledgement on both sides that we need to be careful around these rocks together. Then we move into the 1990s, and I'm sorry to jump through these 3 decades, but pretty much gentlemen's agreements take care of control of disputes for those 3 decades. But by the 1990s, both the wartime emperor of Japan has died and South Korean democracy has burst onto the scene, meaning that the contested histories of the first half of the 20th century are now on the street. And they are part of the democratization of political processes in both Japan in the wake of Emperor Hirohito's death and in South Korea in the overthrow of the final dictatorships. And so left with the so-called history problems in the hands of the people, all sorts of things get combined. The former sex slaves of the Japanese Empire, the former forcibly conscripted soldiers, laborers, and these rocks. In the 1990s and into about 2004, the rocks, I would argue, are the least important component of the history problems. Because at that time, it's the living victims of the history problems that really take control of international discussion about Japan's role in the 20th century. And I mean, I'm sure many of us have attended events in which victims were given voice for the first time, and there's nothing more emotional than hearing one of these people speak. The problem is there are very few of them left. And so as the victims of these histories have increasingly died, I would argue that the rocks have moved in. And that's why for Japan, it's several island disputes. For Korea, it's the issue with one island versus Japan, for reclaiming pride in the name of Korea, for Korean identity, Korean-ness, moving forward to the 21st century. For Japan, each of the islands is a shard of its former empire, the one disputed with Russia, the one disputed with Korea and China. And so these territorial disputes have really taken center stage of the history problems, which I would argue is what makes them so potentially violent, because it's hard to imagine that a national military campaign would be fought in the name of some old victims of a long gone war, but matters would be very different over a territorial dispute, I think.